Representative Edsel Lagman is recognized. Please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker and distinguished colleagues, the Kontra-Sona, as the name suggests, is principally a critique of what the President said and failed to say in his State of the Nation address. It also embodies the authentic opposition's suggested alternative programs and reforms. It likewise highlights the instances of concurrence with the President's report to the nation, albeit with some reservations. Let me start with the third aspect of the Kontra-Sona on concurrence. Number one, the President is correct when he said that, quote, the biggest problem that we encountered was inflation, unquote. And he's also right that the inflation rate is down to 5.4% in June from a high of 8.7% in January this year. He added that the surge in inflation is caused by the ill effects of the pandemic, the war between Russia and Ukraine, aggravated by slowdown of production of oil-producing countries, and the concomitant increase in the prices of petroleum products. The President added that his administration adopted policies which resulted in taming the inflation rate. However, the President failed to specify what enabling policies his administration implemented to achieve the lowering of inflation. Mr. Speaker, what did the government do considering that the war between Russia and Ukraine is still ongoing and beyond our control? Moreover, the pricing of petroleum by the oil-producing countries is also beyond our control. Furthermore, the emerging economic recovery is driven by the diminishing adverse effects of the phasing out of the pandemic and the revenge spending on consumption and travel of Filipinos liberated from the fangs of the contagion. Pray, Mr. President, what magic wand did you wield to ease the inflation? Or the inflation wane as a result of the normal economic dynamics without much government intervention? It has to be underscored that despite the recent deceleration in the inflation rate, the inflation levels continue to be oppressive. A family's income can buy fewer goods and services than before. Alternatively, it has to labor more to earn more to be able to get the same volume of goods and services. Filipinos can only hope for the more bearable 2.4% inflation rate in the pre-pandemic 2019. Number two, we also agree with the President's statement that the campaign against illegal drugs continues, but it has taken on a new phase. It is now geared towards community-based treatment, rehabilitation, education, and reintegration. But what is worrisome is that hundreds were killed in the drug campaign during the President's first year. The Dahas project of the UP Third World Studies Center monitored at least 342 drug-related killings from July 1, 2022 to June 20, 2023, including 115 killed during anti-illegal drugs operations by state agents. This number increases to 146 to include those killed by government forces who have been linked to illegal drugs. Number three, We commend the President for his strong words against smugglers of agricultural products. He failed, however, to mention the staggering magnitude of the smuggling problem. Brave words are not enough. Swift and resolute actions are imperative. We also laud the enactment of the Agrarian Emancipation Act, which condones 57 billion worth of loans of agrarian reform beneficiaries. However, what the President most probably does not know is the more progressive House version was watered down in the bicameral conference. Number 5, let us give credit where credit is due. The administration has indeed admirably succeeded in keeping the unemployment rate below 5% in each of the first 5 months of 2023, compared to the higher than 5% in each of the first 5 months in 2022. Moreover, the 2023 monthly unemployment rate has steadily slid from 4.8% in January to 4.3% in May. However, the adequacy of the income of those employed may have to be examined and the underemployment rate reduced. The administration should also look into the noticeable drops in employment in wholesale and retail trade, construction, and manufacturing. While the employment rate has gone down, the President has failed to disclose his agenda for the protection of labor in terms of abolishing contractualization, enhancing security of tenure, strengthening unionism, and approximating the living wage mandated by the Constitution. 6, we are likewise extremely pleased that the President strongly urged Filipino parents to have their children fully vaccinated against childhood diseases. And 7, the Bureau of Internal Revenue and the Bureau of Customs must be congratulated for exceeding their respective tax collection targets. Indeed, tax consciousness and responsibility must inhere in every taxpayer, from the hierarchy of leadership and the mandarins of big business to minor functionaries and small entrepreneurs. Now, let me go to the West Philippine Sea. Mr. Speaker, the President said that, quote, "We will protect our sovereign rights and preserve our territorial integrity in defense of rules-based international order," unquote. Perhaps in reference to China's incursions in the West Philippine Sea. This was a reiteration of what he said on February 19, 2023, that he would not surrender an inch of Philippine territory in the West Philippine Sea. Since he made that battle cry, the Philippines has not recovered an inch of territory in the West Philippine Sea, illegally amassed and arrogantly occupied by China. Mr. Speaker, victory is not in the arbitral decision. It is in the full enforcement of the award. We hope very soon the Philippines can proclaim that President Marcos Jr. has finally enforced the arbitral award after President Benigno Aquino III 7 years ago obtained the favorable arbitral decision, while President Rodrigo Duterte forfeited to China the said decision. We must seize the fresh momentum brought by the strong support for the Philippines of the G7 countries, European Union member countries, major world economic power Australia, and India, a member of the G20 and the world's largest democracy. All these countries have vowed to help the Philippines enforce the award by stopping China's contumacious defiance of the arbitral decision and its continuing incursions and militarization in the West Philippine Sea. The Philippines can immediately host a conference of these kindred nations to make a bold resolve for China to comply with the arbitral award. Valid economic sanctions against China can be enforced for it to cease and desist being a renegade in the community of nations. Moreover, the latest Pulse Asia survey conducted on June 19 to 23, 2023 documents that 80% of Filipinos agree that the Philippines needs alliances with other countries to defend the West Philippine Sea and to protect international order. Mr. Speaker, two important events happened on July 18, 2023. First, President Marcos Jr. signed into law the Mahahalagang Investment Fund. And second, the Appellate Chamber of the International Criminal Court rejected the appeal of the Philippines on the alleged lack of jurisdiction of the ICC and its prosecutors over former President Rodrigo Duterte and his cohorts for alleged crimes against humanity in relation to the deadly war on drugs, wherein thousands of mostly marginalized and disadvantaged Filipinos were extrajudicially killed. President Marcos Jr. approved the MIF despite the credible and learned opposition of experts and economists, who repeatedly pointed out that the measure is ill-timed and lacks fiscal wisdom, considering that major negative economic indicators presently panel the economy. It has also been posited that the fact that the funds which will be a source for the MIF would be better used for budgetary support to the annual General Appropriations Act for socio-economic services and essential infrastructure development. Why invest on contingent projects when funds are urgently needed to finance the national budget? Since the Mahahalagang Investment Fund is now fait accompli, with the solid support of the presidential economic advisors, we hope it would succeed. We hope it would succeed. However, once the Mahahalagang Investment Fund fails, the heads of these economic advisors must roll. Mr. Speaker, the President failed to reiterate his stance for the Philippines to completely disengage from the International Criminal Court's jurisdiction consequent to the denial of the country's appeal challenging the jurisdiction of the ICC and its prosecutors. It must also be underscored that the issue of complementarity, where the ICC recognizes the functioning of a country's criminal justice system, does not obtain in the Philippines because the principal suspect, former President Duterte, and his major correspondents have not been prosecuted and brought before the appropriate Philippine courts and remain scot-free. Recognizing the jurisdiction of the ICC and its prosecutors is the only honorable option of adhering to the Rome Statute, whose applicability to the Philippines subsisted over crimes against humanity purportedly committed by the respondents before the official effectivity of the Philippine withdrawal on March 17, 2019. No less than the Supreme Court, in the case of Pangilinan versus Cayetano et al., confirmed the jurisdiction of the ICC and its prosecutors over crimes against humanity allegedly committed by Duterte and his cohorts between November 1, 2011, when the Rome Statute entered into force in the Philippines, and March 17, 2019, the effectivity of the Philippines withdrawal. Mr. Speaker, once a party, like a country, files an appeal, it barely submits to the jurisdiction of the appellate forum. It is bound to accept the decision on appeal, whether favorable or adverse. It is stooped from rejecting a denial of its appeal. Otherwise, it makes a mockery of the appellate process and becomes a rebel against the international order. Let me now go to the economy. Mr. Speaker, the SONA is supposed to be truth-telling with a pardonable degree of embellishment to paint a future of hope and a recital of accomplishments, either actual or perceived. But devoid of embellishments, the Philippine economy is still skewed against the impoverished multitude. The face of the economic progress must be the human image of the uplifted poor, not the logo of the peso or dollar for the dominant elite. For policymakers like members of the Congress, knowing and understanding the real score is indispensable in legislating responsive and responsible policies. What then is the real score? Central to economic recovery and development is the attainment of sustainable human development. Economic growth must be people-oriented, particularly for the marginalized and disadvantaged. We are distant from this goal when juxtaposed with relevant indicators. On Human Development Index, the actual state of the nation's economy is not measured solely or primarily by traditional economic indicators like GNP, GDP, etc., but the Human Development Index, SDI, which according to the United Nations Development Program quantifies, quote, average achievement in three key dimensions of human development: a long and healthy life, knowledge, and a decent standard of living. The Philippines' HDI of 0.699, with one as the highest, ranks the country 116th out of 191 countries. The country's current score is below the East Asia and Pacific average of 0.749 and the world's average of 0.732. Gini coefficient. The Gini coefficient is a measure of inequality. The higher the Gini coefficient, the worse the inequality. At 40.7 in 2021, the Philippines has the third worst inequality in Asia and the Pacific, below Indonesia, Vietnam, Thailand, which have better Gini coefficients at 37.9, 36.8, and 35.1, respectively. On poverty. In March this year, a survey of the Social Weather Station revealed that 51%, or about 14 million households, considered themselves poor. After only 3 months, or from June 29, June 28 to July 1, another SWS survey documented that 45% of Filipino families rated themselves as poor, or a 6% reduction. This drastic decline is unprecedented, considering that Filipino households were still reeling from high inflation, albeit abated, during the survey period. The SWS will have to explain if they have employed a new methodology. Nonetheless, 45% of Filipino families, or 12.5 million households, which translate to 62.5 million Filipinos computed at a family of 5, is nothing to be proud of. It is still at a higher level with an additional 30% of Filipinos considering themselves border poor, while only 22% said that they were not poor. Even the President did not claim this extraordinary reduction as a success of his administration. That is stuck. The country's debt is stuck at 12.79 trillion in June 2022, just before the start of the current administration. At the end of May 2023, or after 11 months, the debt stock increased by 1.31 trillion to 14.1 trillion. Administration economists always advise us against getting alarmed by the size of the national debt. They invariably point to the current 61% debt to GDP ratio, which is negligibly higher than the 60% international standard. Filipinos will nevertheless feel more comfortable with the debt to GDP ratio brought down to the pre-pandemic level of 39.6 in 2019. There is also a need for a congressional inquiry to investigate and validate the utilization of international and domestic debts the Philippines incurred during the Duterte and the present administrations. Debt service. More burdensome than the size of the debt stock is debt servicing, which is composed of principal amortization, which are automatically appropriated and much larger, and interest payments, which are budgeted in the GAA. This year's total debt service is 1,601,954,000 pesos, higher than the last year's 1,297,791,000 pesos. Debt service is expected to balloon further in 2024, eating funds for socio-economic services and infrastructure development. Economic growth. In terms of real GDP, the economy grew by 6.4% in the first quarter of 2023. This is respectable. But as this administration itself notes, this is the lowest growth rate in the last 8 quarters. Net inflows of foreign direct investments, FDI, dropped by 14.1% in April as investors remain concerned over an economic slowdown and elevated inflation, the Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas said. Data released by the BSP showed FDI net inflows declined to 876 million in April from 1.02 billion in the same month in 2022. The much ballyhooed foreign investment commitments amounting to 3.9 trillion or $71 billion purportedly secured during the President's travels have yet to materialize. Human rights. Mr. Speaker, the President utterly failed to mention the dismal state of human rights in the country, despite the government's protestation that it adheres to the protection and promotion of human rights. The Human Rights Watch Deputy Director for Asia, Ronnie Lau, said, and I quote, President Marcos needs to do more than issue statements about democracy and the rule of law to demonstrate a genuine commitment to human rights. Without concrete action to break all patterns of abuses and secure accountability for past crimes, his words have little credibility. There is indeed a gaping chasm between the President's words and his actions. Even worse than the President's apathy to the current victims of human rights violation is his outright refusal to acknowledge that such violations were rampantly committed during his father's regime. As the President himself previously said, there must be a high level of accountability for human rights violations. But how can there be accountability when the President himself obstinately refuses to even acknowledge the existence of these violations? The enactment of a human rights legislation must be prioritized and active human rights policy advocacy encouraged. The Human Rights Defenders Protection Bill, already approved on third and final reading both in the 17th and 18th Congresses by the House of Representatives, must be enacted into law without further delay. It is crucial that we closely monitor how human rights laws are implemented. On health, Mr. Speaker, President Marcos Jr., even before the SONA, rationalized that the worsening shortage of health workers is due to their outstanding success during the pandemic, resulting in the increasing demand, particularly for nurses in overseas employment. Unfortunately, this success is eroded by the country's failure, both in the public and private sectors, to adequately compensate and extend benefits to our health workers to prevent their exodus to foreign employment. Mr. Speaker, a special health issue is malnutrition. Statistics on malnutrition in the Philippines are depressing. Every day, 95 children die of malnutrition. 27 out of 1,000 children die before their 5th birthday, and 1/3 of Filipino children are stunted. According to the UNICEF, the Philippines is 5th among countries with the highest stunting prevalence in Asia and the Pacific, and is one of the 10 countries with the highest number of stunted children in the world. As expected, the culprit is poverty. Among the poorest 20% of Filipino households, the stunting growth is much higher at 42.4%. Not that the Filipino family is unwilling to give its children good nutrition. It is simply financially unable to do so. Government must rescue our children with proper intervention. Agriculture. Mr. Speaker, the contribution of agriculture sector to the Philippine economy is falling over time. Over the decades, average annual growth rate of agriculture fell from 0.6% in the 1950s to less than 2% from 2010 to 2015. In 2022, while the economy improved by 7.6%, agriculture limped with a negligible 0.5% growth. Agriculture, the sector that feeds the nation, must be revitalized. Its strengthening will stimulate the industrial and service sectors. Higher incomes of farmers and fisherfolks will enable them to purchase more products from the industry and service sectors. To boost agricultural growth, more farm-to-market roads must be constructed. More post-harvest facilities must be provided to avoid wastages. Farmers and fisherfolks must be empowered to access cheap credit. Agricultural insurance must be made available to them. Research and extension services should be maximized. And finally, construction and repair of irrigation systems must be intensified. Some of these were also proposed by the President. Unfortunately, these veritable programs have been reduced to motherhood statements because they have largely stagnated on the drawing board. Likewise, rice and sugar importation should be short-term emergency measures and must be minimized. Mr. Speaker, in the interest of time and devote more discussion to education, I will deliver a separate privilege speech on this issue. The proclamation of President Marcos Jr. that Bagong Pilipinas has arrived is a copycat of Marcos Sr.'s Bagong Lipunan. We do not need a recycled, discredited slogan. If we play with words, we play with fire. Thank you, Mr. Speaker and distinguished colleagues.
Bunyog, bunyog, halikan na kasama ka. Bunyog, kapag buklod ay may pag-asa. Luzon, Visayas, Mindanao, isa ang pananaw. Sa bagong Pilipinas ang bunyog isisigaw. Bunyog, bunyog.